Imagine receiving a phone call from your husband in the middle of the night. He's panicking, saying that two people are chasing him. He's running through a dark forest. He's terrified. You hear his voice shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. And then he says something strange. "Babe, I think I'm going to have to take all my clothes off." Why? Why would a man running for his life need to take off his clothes? And then the call cuts out. You try calling back. No answer. 2 days later, they find his body lying face down in the woods. He's still fully clothed, but his clothing is twisted in a bizarre way. There are no signs of an attack, no serious injuries, and no one at all, ever finds the two people he said were chasing him. This is exactly what happened to Cullen Finnerty in May of 2013. A case that becomes more disturbing and more incomprehensible the deeper you look into it. Before we venture deeper into these unsolved mysteries, I want to take a moment to thank you for choosing to stay with me tonight. If you're someone who's drawn to the unexplored corners of the dark, and you're looking for a quiet space to lose yourself in eerie stories before sleep, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. A single like from you doesn't just help the channel grow, it's also a powerful source of motivation for me to keep going on this journey. There is one small note I'd like to share. The stories you're about to hear are based on real reports and eyewitness accounts. Due to their mysterious nature, and because some details describe crime scenes, this content may not be suitable for viewers who are highly sensitive or for children. Please take a moment to consider before continuing. Now, let's set aside the weight of the long day behind you. Take a slow, deep breath and allow your mind to settle. We'll return to the next unfolding details right after this. To understand just how strange this story is, you first need to know who Cullen Finnerty was. Cullen was not an ordinary man. He was a former elite football player, a standout quarterback at Grand Valley State University who led his team to 2 consecutive national championships. He was strong, intelligent, and accustomed to extreme pressure. He had faced hundreds of massive defenders charging straight at him and stayed calm every time. After retiring from football, Cullen became a coach. He married Jennifer, had 2 young children, and settled into a happy family life in Michigan. Everyone who knew him described him as a good man, a devoted father, and a thoughtful, loving husband. So what happened on the night of May 26, 2013? That day, Cullen was attending a family gathering in rural northern Michigan. It was a relaxed, joyful occasion. Barbecuing, conversation, kids running around. Cullen was in a good mood. Around 5 p.m., he decided to go fishing by himself. He wanted some quiet time before dark. He told Jennifer he planned to take a small pontoon boat out onto a nearby river, fish for a while, and then head back. Jennifer wasn't worried. Cullen was experienced outdoors. He could swim. He had gone fishing hundreds of times before. There was no reason to be concerned. "When should I pick you up at the dock?" Jennifer asked. "Around 8 p.m., Cullen replied. "I'll call you when I'm ready." And then he left. A family friend drove Cullen to the Upper Manistee River and dropped him off with a pontoon boat around 5:30 p.m. The friend watched Cullen paddle out toward the middle of the river, wave goodbye, and then drive away. That was the last time anyone ever saw Cullen Finnerty acting normally. The next few hours passed quietly. Jennifer stayed home with the kids, prepared dinner, played with them. She wasn't worried. Cullen would call when he was ready to be picked up. 8 p.m. came and went. No call. 8:30, still nothing. By 9 p.m., Jennifer started to feel uneasy. She called Cullen. The phone rang, but no one answered. She called again. Still nothing. Now she was genuinely worried. This wasn't like Cullen. He always answered her calls. He always kept his word. She tried again, and again, and again. Still no answer. At 9:30 p.m., Jennifer decided to call the police. She reported that her husband had gone fishing and hadn't returned, and that she couldn't reach him. The police took the report, but told her to wait a bit longer. Maybe Cullen was stuck somewhere, or his phone battery had died. They advised her to keep trying to call. Then, at around 10:15 p.m., Jennifer's phone rang. It was Cullen. She answered instantly. "Cullen, where are you? I've been so worried." But the sound of his voice stopped her cold. He sounded terrified, genuinely terrified. "Babe," Cullen said, his voice shaking, his breathing heavy. There are two people chasing me. Jennifer's heart seemed to stop. What? Two people? Where are you? I don't know, Cullen replied. But they're chasing me. You need to call the police. Right now. Are you hurt? Jennifer asked, panic rising in her voice. No, but, babe, I think I'm going to have to take all my clothes off. Jennifer froze. What? But Cullen didn't explain. He only said, come get me at the dock. Hurry. Then the line went dead. Jennifer immediately called back. Cullen answered, said a few incoherent words, and hung up again. She called a third time. This time the phone rang, but no one picked up. Jennifer's mind was racing. Two people chasing Cullen? Who? Why? And why was he talking about taking off his clothes? None of it made any sense. She called the police again and told them everything he had said. This time, they took it very seriously. They asked where Cullen might be. She told them about the dock where he had asked her to meet him. Meanwhile, Jennifer's brother, Matt, tried calling Cullen himself. Shockingly, Cullen answered. Cullen, where are you? Matt asked. I don't know, Cullen said, still clearly frightened. But there are two people, they're still chasing me. Are you still on the boat? Are you on land? Things are getting really difficult out here, Cullen said vaguely. Then he hung up. That was the last time anyone ever spoke to Cullen Finnerty alive. Jennifer, her family, and the police rushed to the dock Cullen had mentioned. He wasn't there. There was no sign of him. They called his name into the darkness. No response. Police officially launched a missing persons investigation. They contacted Cullen's mobile provider and requested location data from his phone. What they found was baffling. The data showed that over the past several hours, Cullen's phone had moved between 4 different locations, each one 4 to 7 miles apart. That meant Cullen had covered an enormous distance in a short amount of time through rough, wooded terrain. But there was something even stranger. Each of the 4 locations was either directly on or very close to a paved road. If Cullen was running from someone, why didn't he stop at the road? Roads mean cars, people, safety. Why would he keep crossing roads only to run back into the deep forest? It made no sense. Still, police now had 4 search areas. Teams were dispatched to each location. Within an hour, they found Cullen's pontoon boat. It had drifted to the riverbank not far from where he had been dropped off. One paddle was missing. Cullen was nowhere to be found. They searched the surrounding area, calling his name. There was no answer. One unsettling detail emerged. A man who lived near where the boat was found told police that around the time Cullen disappeared, he heard screaming coming from the direction of the river. He assumed it was fishermen or kids messing around and didn't think much of it. Now, that screaming carried a far more disturbing weight. The search continued through the night and into the next day. Hundreds of people joined, police, volunteers, friends, family. They used search dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging equipment. Still, no sign of Cullen. Then, on the evening of May 28th, nearly 48 hours after Cullen disappeared, they found him. His body was lying in the woods, less than half a mile from a paved road, positioned between the 4 phone ping locations. Cullen was face down. His right arm was tucked beneath his body. His left arm was stretched above his head, his hand clenched tightly in the grass, as if he had been trying to crawl, trying to pull himself forward. When they rolled him over, a small amount of blood came from his nose. But aside from that, there were no serious injuries. No stab wounds. No gunshots. No signs of an assault. Cullen was still fully dressed. But there was one disturbing detail. The straps on his fishing waders were badly twisted. Anyone who has worn waders knows that if the straps are twisted that severely, it becomes extremely uncomfortable, and you would fix it immediately. No one could tolerate that kind of discomfort for hours. This suggested that at some point, Cullen had taken his clothes off, exactly as he had told his wife on the phone, and then put them back on. But when he did, the straps ended up twisted. The question was, why? Why would a man fleeing through a dark forest take off his clothes? And who put them back on? Cullen himself or someone else? Cullen's phone was found in his pocket, confirming that the location data had indeed tracked his movements accurately. The initial autopsy was inconclusive. There was no clear cause of death, no major trauma, no evidence of homicide. Later, After further examination, the medical examiner determined the cause of death: pneumonia caused by aspirating his own vomit. Cullen had vomited, and in some state, possibly face down, possibly panicked, he inhaled it into his lungs, leading to fatal pneumonia. But this explanation raised even more questions. Why did he vomit? Why was he in a position where he could aspirate it? What drove him into such extreme panic that he couldn't prevent this from happening? Many believe the answer lies in Cullen's brain injuries from years of playing football. CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a degenerative brain disease found in many former football players, caused by repeated head trauma. Its symptoms include personality changes, depression, and most importantly, paranoia. In fact, in 2011, 2 years before his death, Cullen had experienced a paranoid episode. One day, he suddenly believed someone was following him. He went to a family member's house and said, "I think someone is watching me." But when asked who it was or where they were, Cullen couldn't explain. So the official theory is this: Cullen experienced a severe paranoid episode while fishing. He believed 2 people were chasing him, even though no one was actually there. He panicked, abandoned the boat, ran into the woods, vomited during extreme distress, aspirated it, and died. It sounds reasonable, but there are details that don't fit. First, if this was merely paranoia, why did Cullen repeatedly cross paved roads without stopping? During his 2011 episode, his instinct was to seek help. He went to a family member's home. When humans are afraid, they look for safety. Roads represent safety. Why did he keep leaving them and running deeper into the forest? Second, why did he tell his wife he was going to have to take off his clothes? That is a very specific, very strange statement. Even in a paranoid state, why would he believe that removing his clothes would help him escape? Third, why abandon the boat? The boat was safety. If he feared people on land, he could have paddled to the middle of the river, out of reach. Instead, he chose the far more dangerous option, entering the forest. Fourth, the screaming heard by the neighbor. If Cullen was just running through the woods, why was he screaming? Was he calling for help? Screaming in fear? Or screaming in pain? And finally, the biggest question of all: if no one was chasing Cullen, how did he manage to travel such a long distance over difficult terrain at night? He was not inexperienced outdoors. He was not easily frightened. What could drive a strong former athlete, someone who had endured immense pressure on the football field, into such absolute terror? There's another theory, one many people believe, though there is no way to prove it. Something was in those woods. Not a person, not an animal, but something else. It noticed Cullen while he was fishing alone, and it chose to follow him, not to kill him immediately, but to toy with him, to frighten him, to hunt him. Cullen ran. He tried to escape. But no matter where he went, across roads, through rivers, over hills, it stayed there. Always present, always chasing. And after hours of pure terror, Cullen's body finally gave out. He collapsed. He vomited. And in his dazed, exhausted, terrified state, he inhaled it and died. As for what chased him, it vanished back into the forest, leaving no trace. Because it never leaves traces. It isn't something that does. Of course, this is only a theory. There is no evidence, no proof. But when you look at all the strange details, the panicked phone calls, the repeated crossings of roads, the comment about taking off his clothes, the incredible distance he covered, you have to ask yourself, was it really just paranoia? Or was Cullen Finnerty truly being chased by something we cannot understand, something we cannot explain? Jennifer will never have a definitive answer. She lost her husband under terrifying, inexplicable circumstances. Her 2 children lost their father. And somewhere deep in the forests of Michigan, there may still be something out there, watching, waiting, searching for the next victim. Cullen's final words still echo in Jennifer's mind every night. There are 2 people chasing me. 2 people no one has ever found. 2 people who may never have been people at all. And that is the most frightening part. In 1989, Eloise Lindsay entered the Appalachian Mountains for what was meant to be a 7-day trek. She came back with a fractured mind, and a story that science has never been able to explain. She spoke of endless nights under siege by a voice that had no vocal cords, no physical source. An entity that circled her tent in the dark, close enough for her to feel its presence, yet it left nothing behind on the soft forest floor. No footprints, no crash grass, no disturb no evidence at all, except the raw, primal fear that lingered in her eyes long after she returned. What haunted Eloise throughout that entire week? And why did the forest erase every trace of it the moment dawn arrived? But before we delve into what happened to Eloise in those lost woods, we need to go back to November 1989, to a moment when a 22-year-old woman stood at the most important crossroads of her life. Eloise Lindsay had just graduated from college. She had her degree in hand, her future stretched out in front of her, and yet inside, she felt utterly lost. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know which path to choose. Surrounded by endless possibilities and expectations, she felt unmoored, disconnected. There was, however, one thing Eloise knew with certainty about herself. She loved nature. She was an experienced hiker and backpacker. Since childhood, she had been comfortable carrying a pack, sleeping outdoors, and living close to the land. And she believed that if she could step away from the noise of the world, if she could disappear into the mountains for a while, she might find the answer she was looking for. So Eloise planned a journey of self-discovery, a 43.3-mile trek along the Appalachian Trail, one of the most famous long-distance hiking routes in the United States, stretching through wild forests and mountains from Georgia to Maine. Her plan was carefully thought out. For the first 7 days, she would be completely alone. No companions, no support team, just herself and the wilderness. On the 7th day, she was scheduled to meet a friend at a predetermined point. That friend would bring additional food and water and then hike with her for the remainder of the journey. When Eloise told her parents about the plan, they weren't worried. They knew their daughter was experienced. She had taken similar trips before and always returned safely. So they smiled, hugged her, and said, "Good luck. We'll see you when you get back." On November 4th, 1989, Eloise began her journey. She stood at the trailhead in South Carolina, her backpack fully loaded, a map in her hand, and hope in her heart. She stepped into the forest believing that when she returned, she would have found her purpose. The first 2 days were wonderful. The weather was perfect, clear skies, warm sunlight without oppressive heat. The landscape looked like a painting, autumn trees blazing in shades of gold, red, and orange, small streams murmuring over rocks, air so clean that every breath felt refreshing. More importantly, Eloise had time to think, time to reflect. When you walk for hours each day with nothing but the sound of your boots on the trail, your mind opens in strange ways. Deeper thoughts surface, questions about meaning, purpose, direction. Eloise felt she was on the right path. She believed this journey would give her what she was searching for. But on the morning of the 3rd day, everything began to change. Eloise woke up inside the small tent she had pitched near the trail the night before. Dawn light filtered through the fabric. Birds were singing all around her. Everything should have felt normal. But the moment she opened her eyes, she knew something was wrong. A heavy, oppressive feeling settled over her, as if an invisible hand were pressing down on her chest. A sense of fear with no clear source. She didn't know why, but she knew something wasn't right. She lay there for a few minutes, tried to identify where the feeling was coming from. Had she forgotten something important? Missed some danger? But nothing came to mind. Everything should have been fine. Probably just a bad morning mood, she told herself. I'll pack up, get moving, and it'll pass. So Eloise crawled out of the tent. She began folding it up, rolling her sleeping bag, organizing her gear. And as she worked, her eyes casually drifted toward the surrounding trees. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. It was just an instinctive glance. And that's when she saw him. A man stood behind a tree about 30 to 40 feet away, watching her. Eloise startled, but she wasn't immediately terrified. This was the Appalachian Trail, after all. It was a popular hiking route. Seeing another hiker wasn't unusual. Even camping near strangers happened from time to time. But something felt wrong. The man didn't greet her. He didn't wave. He didn't say good morning or make small talk the way hikers usually do when they pass each other. He just stood there, watching. Eloise blinked, trying to get a clearer look, and the man was gone. He didn't walk out of sight. He didn't retreat deeper into the forest. He simply wasn't there anymore, as if he had never existed. Eloise froze, staring at the spot where she had just seen him. Her heart began to race. She waited, expecting him to step out again, to explain himself, or at least make his presence known. Nothing happened. Only the wind moving through the leaves. Only birdsong. Only the deep silence of the forest. Did my eyes just play tricks on me? Eloise wondered. Was it just a shadow? A trick of the light? But she knew what she had seen. It was a person. A man. Standing behind a tree. Watching her. And now he had vanished without a trace. Without explanation. The fear she had felt upon waking now had a clear focus. Eloise became acutely aware of one specific sensation. The feeling of being watched. You know that feeling. When you can't see anyone, you can't hear anything, but something deep inside you, the ancient, instinctive part of your brain, whispers that you're not alone, that something is observing you, that a predator is nearby. That was exactly how Eloise felt, as if unseen eyes were tracking her every movement, as if she were prey, and something was deciding whether or not to strike. She had no proof, no evidence, but she was alone in the wilderness, and no matter how experienced she was still a young woman, alone, vulnerable. And the man, if he truly was a man, did not reveal himself again. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply disappeared like a ghost. That made everything far more terrifying. Eloise panicked. She stuffed her gear into her backpack as fast as she could, no longer folding things neatly, just cramming everything inside. The moment she zipped the pack closed, she threw it over her shoulders and started moving quickly down the trail, away from the campsite, away from the place where she had seen him. But even after putting hundreds of meters between herself and that spot, the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. She felt as though someone was walking right behind her, so close she could almost hear their breathing. Eloise kept turning around, again and again and again. Each time, the trail behind her was empty, silent. No one was there, yet the sensation remained. Powerful, impossible to ignore. She began to walk faster, then jog, then run. And as she ran, a harsh reality set in. She was in a remote section of the Appalachian Trail. There were no nearby towns, no ranger stations, no safe place to flee to. Her next scheduled meeting point with her friend was still days away. And if she stayed on the trail as planned, she would have to spend at least 1 or 2 more nights in this forest, with whatever or whoever was watching her. No chance. Eloise decided she had to get off the trail. She needed to find a road, find people, find safety immediately. She remembered from her map that a paved road ran roughly parallel to the trail, lower down the mountain and some distance away. To reach it, she would have to leave the marked trail and cut through untracked wilderness. Under normal circumstances, this would be a terrible decision. Leaving a clearly marked trail to bushwhack through dense forest is how people get lost, injured, or worse. But Eloise's fear of whatever was following her outweighed all caution. She couldn't bear the thought of spending another night on that trail, knowing that someone, might be lurking in the darkness. So she left the trail. She ran downhill through thick brush, leapt over small streams, forced her way through undergrowth, tried to reach the road she hoped was somewhere below. And then she heard it, noise from behind her, not the rustle of leaves in the wind, not the scurry of small animals, but footsteps, heavy footsteps, something large moving through the forest. Following her, Eloise turned around. She saw nothing. She stopped, holding her breath, listening. The sound stopped. She moved again. The sound returned. She stopped. It stopped. Whatever it was deliberately matching her movements, watching her, hunting her. And then she heard the voice. Not a normal human voice, not clear speech, but strange sounds, deep, guttural cries, like the roar of something inhuman. It sounded male, but not human. It sounded like language, but not any language she recognized. Just sounds. Horrifying. Unexplainable. Eloise's heart pounded. She ran. Faster. Not caring where she was going anymore. Just run. Just get away. She ran through the forest for hours. The sun moved across the sky, and slowly, the light began to fade. When darkness finally fell, Eloise realized a terrible truth. She hadn't found the road. She was lost. Completely lost. She had no idea where she was, how far she was from the trail, or which direction would take her back. And now it was dark. She had no choice. She had to stop. She had to set up camp. Alone, in the dark, with something still out there. Her hands shook as she pitched the tent. She kept looking around, trying to see through the thickening darkness, but all she could make out were black silhouettes of trees. When the tent was finally up, she crawled inside and zipped it shut. She lay in her sleeping bag, eyes wide open, listening. It didn't take long, maybe only minutes, before she heard them. Those sounds again. The strange, guttural cries coming from somewhere out there in the darkness. This time, they were closer. Much closer. Then Eloise heard footsteps, slowly circling her tent. Deliberate. Methodical. Something was walking around her, studying her, deciding what to do. Eloise lay perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. Tears streamed down her face as she prayed, begging whatever was out there to leave her alone. All night, the sounds continued, sometimes near, sometimes farther away, but always present, always reminding her that she was not alone, that something was out there, waiting. When dawn finally came, Eloise felt as though she had lived through an entire century in hell. She hadn't slept for a single second. Every muscle in her body was locked tight with fear. Her ears ached from hours of relentless listening. But as the pale morning light filtered through the fabric of her tent, the sounds stopped. Silence settled over the forest, an unsettling silence, terrifying in its own way. Eloise carefully unzipped the tent and looked outside. The dim light of early morning slipped through the trees. Everything looked normal, calm, still. Yet when she stepped out and scanned the campsite, she found no footprints, no sign that any creature had circled her tent all night. The leaves were undisturbed. The soil showed no marks, as if nothing had ever been there. But Eloise knew what she had heard. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined it. Something had been out there. Of that, she was certain. Determined to escape this nightmare, Eloise packed up once again and kept moving. She clung to the hope of finding a paved road, finding help. But that day was no different from the one before. She pushed through dense forest, trying to navigate by the sun, but every direction looked the same. And throughout the day, she felt it. The constant sensation of being watched never left her. The second night was worse. The sounds returned, but this time they were more aggressive. Closer. Something slammed against the trees surrounding her tent, producing loud, jarring cracks that made her flinch violently. The roars sounded angry. Eloise sobbed inside her sleeping bag, praying she would survive the night. The third day, the fourth, the fifth, all blurred together into one long nightmare. Eloise wandered the forest completely lost, with no idea where she was. Her food supplies dwindled. Her water was nearly gone. But more terrifying than anything else was the steady collapse of her mental state. Because every night it came back. Every night it drew closer. And Eloise began to wonder, was it playing with her? Could it kill her at any moment? But was choosing instead to prolong her suffering? By the sixth night, Eloise had almost given up hope. She believed she was going to die there, that no one would ever find her, that she would become one of those unsolved mysteries, another person lost on the Appalachian Trail, never explained. But on the morning of the seventh day, a miracle happened. Eloise was walking in a daze, no longer truly paying attention to where she was going, when she heard a distant sound, a sound she hadn't heard in days. A car. Her heart began to race. She ran toward the noise, and after several minutes of pushing through the trees, she saw it, a paved road cutting through the forest. Eloise broke down in tears as she stepped out of the woods and onto the solid surface of the road. civilization, safety. Not long after, a car stopped when the driver saw her, a young woman, filthy and exhausted, standing in the middle of the road. The driver took her to the nearest ranger station. When Eloise told her story about getting lost, about being followed by something for days and nights, the rangers were skeptical. They suggested she had likely panicked after losing her way, and her mind had created the sounds. Could have been a bear, one ranger said, or wolves. In the dark, with fear and imagination, natural sounds can seem terrifying. But Eloise knew what she had heard. It wasn't a bear, not a wolf, not any animal she recognized. And what was most disturbing was this. When they took her back to the area where she believed she had camped, they found nothing. No trace of her tent, no footprints, no evidence that she had ever been there. As if those 7 days had taken place in another dimension. To this day, Eloise cannot explain what happened to her in that forest. She never returned to the Appalachian Trail, and she never found the answer she was searching for. But she did find one thing, an understanding that there are forces in nature we cannot explain. Things beyond human comprehension, and sometimes it's best not to go looking for them. How could a person vanish from a sinking ship and reappear on another vessel in the blink of an eye, without anyone realizing what had happened? In 1956, Linda Morgan carried out what would become the most terrifying jump across space in maritime history. Before the catastrophic collision between the Andrea Doria and the Stockholm turned the sea into a graveyard of twisted steel, something unseen had already decided to swap the reality of a 14-year-old girl. We return now to that fateful night, where complacency and fatal mistakes pride opened the door to an event that, even today, makes science shudder to confront. SS Andrea Doria was once the pride of Italy. It was no ordinary ocean liner. It was a symbol of national strength, a masterpiece of modern engineering. People boasted that it was the largest, fastest, and safest ship Italy had ever built. Passengers stepping aboard felt as though they were entering a floating palace. Luxurious lounges, elegant dining rooms, and above all, an overwhelming sense of absolute safety. After all, this was the Andrea Doria, the ship that was said to be unsinkable. But that night, nature had no regard for human pride or reputation. An unusually thick fog rolled across the waters off the eastern coast of the United States. Visibility dropped to almost zero. The captain of the Andrea Doria, a seasoned man with many years of experience, followed standard procedure. He reduced speed, sounded the foghorn, and placed his trust in the ship's modern radar system. And this was where everything began to turn eerily wrong. Not far away, another vessel was moving through the same fog, the SS Stockholm, a Swedish ocean liner. These two massive ships, both equipped with radar, both commanded by experienced captains, were heading straight toward each other at terrifying speed. What went wrong? Both ships saw the other on radar, but both misinterpreted the other's position. A small error in reading the radar screen, a miscalculation of course and angle, and fate was sealed. Worse still, neither side contacted the other to confirm their readings. Each believed they were on the correct path, that the other ship would turn away, until it was too late. When the passengers aboard the Andrea Doria finally saw the lights of the Stockholm piercing through the fog, their hearts seemed to stop. The Stockholm was directly ahead, the distance between them shrinking at a horrifying rate. Panic screams erupted. Urgent commands were shouted. But with two colossal masses of steel, each weighing thousands of tons and moving at speed, stopping or turning in time was impossible. At 11:10 p.m., the night was ripped apart by a thunderous impact. The bow of the Stockholm, specially reinforced for breaking through ice, plunged into the side of the Andrea Doria like a gigantic knife slicing through butter. It penetrated more than 12 meters into the ship, tearing through cabins, crushing everything in its path, before slowly pulling back and leaving a massive, gaping wound in the Italian liner's hull. The scene was horrific. 46 people aboard the Andrea Doria and 5 on the Stockholm were killed instantly in those few seconds. Survivors were left in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Screams, sobs, and the groaning, splintering sounds of the ship blended into one unbearable cacophony. News of the collision spread around the world like lightning. This was no ordinary maritime accident. It was the catastrophe of Italy's unsinkable ship. Every major news outlet reported on it, including ABC News in the United States. And this is where the story takes on a different kind of cruelty. The reporter chosen by ABC to cover the disaster was a man named Edward Morgan, a veteran journalist known for his steady voice and impeccable professionalism. But what his colleagues didn't know, what the audience didn't know as he stepped into the studio, was a devastating truth. His 14-year-old daughter, Linda Morgan, had been on board the Andrea Doria. And just moments before going on air, Edward was informed that his daughter's name was on the list of those missing and presumed dead. Imagine that moment. You are a father who has just been told that your child may have died in the very tragedy you are about to report to the nation. Yet the job must go on. The cameras will roll. The audience is waiting. Edward Morgan did the unthinkable. He went on air. He delivered the news of the collision in a calm, professional tone. Not once did his voice tremble. Not once did he mention his daughter. He was simply a reporter doing his duty, while inside, his heart was breaking into pieces. But while Edward struggled to maintain composure in front of the camera, something extraordinary was happening out at sea. Something that, even today, science struggles to fully explain. When the Stockholm struck the Andrea Doria, one area took the direct hit, the cabin where Linda Morgan had been sleeping. By all conventional logic, anyone in those cabins would have had no chance of survival. They should have been crushed instantly by the immense force of the impact. But Linda did not die. When she regained consciousness after the collision, she was completely disoriented. She had no idea where she was. Everything around her was unfamiliar. She began to cry out, calling for her mother. But there was no answer. Her mother wasn't there. In fact, no one she recognized was there at all. A man aboard the Stockholm, assessing the damage, heard the faint cries of a girl. Following the sound, he ran toward the ship's bow, the very area that had slammed into the Andrea Doria. When he arrived, he froze, staring at a sight he could hardly believe. On the shattered bow of the Stockholm, amid twisted metal, debris, and blood, there was a bed. And sitting on that bed was a 14-year-old girl, remarkably not seriously injured, except for a broken arm. It was Linda Morgan. Later, experts attempted to reconstruct what had happened in those terrifying seconds. Their conclusion was this. When the bow of the Stockholm pierced the Andrea Doria, it cut directly into the cabin where Linda was sleeping. But instead of crushing her, the bow somehow scooped up the bed she was lying on, dragging it into the Stockholm as it penetrated the hull. And when the Stockholm pulled back out of the Andrea Doria, it carried the bed and Linda with it. The odds of this happening were almost non-existent. The angle, the speed, the exact position. Everything had to align with near-millimeter precision. A slight deviation, and Linda would have been crushed. Yet somehow, every factor aligned perfectly to create a miracle. As news of the miracle girl began to spread, Edward Morgan waited in agony. When he was finally told that the girl was his daughter, he could no longer hold himself together. This time, when Edward returned to the camera, he was no longer an objective reporter. He was a father telling the story of the miracle his daughter had survived. He spoke of the pain of reporting the disaster without being able to mention the person he loved most. And he spoke of the indescribable joy of learning that his daughter was still alive. Linda eventually made a full physical recovery. She suffered only a broken arm, an almost unbelievable injury considering what she had endured. But the emotional scars were another matter. Linda lived with survivor's guilt for the rest of her life. Because while she was miraculously saved, her stepfather and her half-sister both perished in the collision. They, too, had been aboard the Andrea Doria. They simply were not as fortunate. The question people still ask to this day is, why Linda? Out of all those who could have been saved, why was she the one chosen by fate? Was it pure chance? Or was there something more? We may never know the answer. But the story of Linda Morgan reminds us that sometimes, in the darkest moments, the unimaginable can still happen. And sometimes all it takes, a bit of luck, a perfect angle, a single magical moment, is enough to turn tragedy into a miracle.